If you grew up in the late 90s, you didn't need an alarm clock on Saturday mornings because you already had a reason to launch yourself out of bed, hit the couch, and sit there for 4 straight hours with a bowl of cereal balanced on your knees. That reason had a name, and it was Kids WB. For nearly 13 years, this programming block handed an entire generation their first taste of Pokémon, their introduction to Batman Beyond, and a weekend ritual of cartoons that felt like they were built for you and not just cobbled together to move merchandise. Although, let's be honest, they moved a lot of merchandise too. Today we're covering the full story of Kids WB, from one man's obsession with beating a network he personally created, to a single Japanese cartoon turning it into the most watched block on all of television, to how it all fell apart when cable networks took over children's programming for good. This is how it started, how it peaked, and how it ended. If you grew up watching any of these shows, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe, and let's get into it. The Man Who Built It Twice. Kids WB doesn't make sense unless you know Jamie Kellner first. Before he ever walked into Warner Brothers, Kellner helped launch Fox Broadcasting and created the Fox Children's Network, better known as Fox Kids, which owned Saturday mornings through the early 90s. And then in 1993, he left Fox and Warner Brothers, hired him almost immediately to build a brand new broadcast network called the WB. January 11, 1995, the WB television network went on the air with Kellner as its founding CEO, but he'd already been sketching plans since the previous July. 6 months before the WB ever broadcast a single show, he was mapping out a children's programming block designed to go head-to-head with the very thing he'd built at Fox. And he talked about it openly, almost eagerly. A 1995 Variety and Broadcasting and Cable cover story captured Kellner laying out his goal: become the most important player in kids television, and within the decade, beat Fox Kids. He went further, stating that both ABC and CBS's Saturday morning blocks were dead in his business plan 3 years out. Kellner was picking a fight with the entire industry and with his own legacy at the same time. September 9, 1995 brought the official debut. Kids WB ran 3 Saturday morning hours from 8 to 11 Eastern, with 1 extra hour on weekday afternoons. Animaniacs, poached from Fox Kids, served as the flagship, joined by Pinky and the Brain, Freakazoid, Earthworm Jim, and the Sylvester and Tweety Mysteries. Weekday afternoons paired Animaniacs reruns with a Looney Tunes compilation called That's Warner Brothers. On paper, the lineup looked solid, but the numbers told a different story. 4th place on day 1, a 1.5 share. That's what the September 1995 debut pulled, which put Kids WB dead last among the 4 Saturday morning blocks, behind Fox Kids, ABC, and CBS. Affiliate clearance created constant headaches because the WB lacked the station coverage of the established networks, and whole markets couldn't access the block at all. Chicago was a prime example, where co-owner Tribune Company's WGN-TV flat-out refused to carry Kids WB until 2004, forcing Chicago viewers onto Weigel Broadcasting's WCIU instead. A national fix came through WGN Superstation feed from 1995 to 1999, but it was a patchwork answer for a block trying to compete against Fox's machine. The whole setup reflected how young the WB was as a network, launched barely 8 months earlier, and still scrambling for affiliate coverage in a landscape where Fox, ABC, and CBS had decades of station relationships locked down. Media buyers noticed. One told Broadcasting and Cable that Kids WB had fewer than half a dozen weekly shows pulling even a 2 rating, and that was on roughly 60% broadcast clearance. None of that stopped Kellner's team from building. Gene McCurdy, president of Warner Brothers Television Animation and Hanna-Barbera, ran the programming side and kept pushing the block bigger. September 1996 stretched Saturdays to 4 hours, and Superman, the animated series, debuted that same fall. A weekday morning hour arrived in September 1997 alongside the backlot-themed rebrand designed by River Street Productions, which finally gave Kids WB a distinct visual identity. What really defined the block's creative direction, though, were the DC shows. September 13, 1997 brought the new Batman Adventures, which paired with Superman, the animated series the following year, as the new Batman Superman Adventures. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini produced both, and Timm talked openly about how different the creative environment felt. At Fox, he said, every single storyboard came back with 5 single-space pages of notes listing things they couldn't do, while the WB usually sent back about 2 paragraphs. That freedom showed on screen. Late 1998 carried momentum but not a ratings crown. Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain both aired their final episodes on November 14, 1998, closing one chapter. And what nobody realized was that the next chapter would rewrite the entire business. February 13, 1999, the day everything changed. A company called 4Kids Entertainment had locked up the exclusive U.S. rights to a Japanese anime called Pokémon, with CEO Alfred Kahn and President Norman Grossfeld running the deal. Pokémon had already aired in broadcast syndication on Fox-affiliated stations in the fall of 1998. But on February 13, 1999, the show moved to Kids WB, and the effect was instant. Nielsen Media Research, as reported by Variety, clocked the debut episode at a 3.9 rating with a 15 share among kids 2 to 11, the best series premiere numbers in Kids WB history. That alone pushed Kids WB past Fox Kids in Saturday morning ratings for the first time, averaging a 2.8 versus Fox Kids' 2.7 in the same demographic that week, and that turned out to be just the floor. March 20th saw Pokémon pulling a 5.6 rating with a 21 share, while the overall block averaged a 3.3, another record. By the week of April 26th, the numbers became hard to believe, a 10.9 rating with a 40 share in boys 6 to 11, meaning 40% of every boy between 6 and 11 watching television that week was tuned to Pokémon on Kids WB. September 4th, 1999 delivered the all-time peak, a 7.8 rating with a 31 share in kids 2 to 11, which Variety reported as the highest single-episode rating in the 4-year history of the block. And here's what makes the timing strange. Weeks before Pokémon debuted, in January 1999, Kids WB brought in Donna Friedman from Nickelodeon to replace Jean McCurdy as head of programming. Friedman, a Harvard graduate who'd cut her teeth at Nickelodeon, arrived just as the building caught fire in the best possible way. Under her leadership, Kids WB climbed to the #1 ratings position on Saturday mornings and held it for 4 straight years across 10 consecutive sweeps victories. Her published professional bio credits her with leading the block to that #1 position, and the track record backs it up completely. By Q4 1999, Kids WB wasn't just winning Saturday mornings. It ranked #1 on all of television in kids 2 to 11, snapping Nickelodeon's streak of 10 consecutive quarters at the top. A broadcast block airing a few hours a week had just beaten a 24-hour cable network purpose-built for kids. An ad buyer from Western Initiative Media put it plainly to Kidscreen at the time. The only thing that's really hot right now is Kids WB, and that's because of Pokémon. The anime empire expands. Pokémon proved that Japanese anime dubbed into English and tied to toy and trading card merchandising could power a Saturday morning block, and Kids WB leaned all the way in. Yu-Gi-Oh!, also distributed through 4Kids Entertainment, debuted on September 29, 2001, and finished #1 in its time period across every major kids demographic on broadcast. By the following spring, Yu-Gi-Oh! Was generating its own headline numbers. May 18, 2002 produced a 9.5 rating, with a 34 share in boys 6 to 11, the highest that Demo saw all season. And then on September 21, 2002, the season premiere beat Nickelodeon head-to-head among kids 6 to 11 for the first time since March 2000, with Kids WB pulling a 5.7 with a 25 share against Nick's 5.4 with a 23. WB president and COO Jed Petrick framed it as proof of the Kids WB brand strength and the underlying advantages of broadcast television. Even the following year stayed strong, with the September 14, 2003 season opener scoring a 6.5 with a 25 share in boys 6 to 11. Between 1999 and 2003, the lineup ran deep. Jackie Chan Adventures premiered September 9, 2000, and Static Shock followed 2 weeks later on September 23rd, carrying the DC animated universe into new territory with one of the first black superheroes headlining his own animated series. X-Men Evolution came in from Marvel, and Film Roman Fucha Lucha brought completely different energy. Ozzy and Drix turned body comedy into a weekly show, and What's New Scooby-Doo revived that franchise for a new generation starting in 2002. Batman Beyond had already been airing since January 10, 1999, running 52 episodes through December 2001, with Will Friedle voicing Terry McGinnis opposite Kevin Conroy as the aging Bruce Wayne. That show became one of the most beloved entries in the DC animated universe, and the voice talent across this entire era ran absurdly deep. Conroy and Mark Hamill had already defined Batman and the Joker through the 90s. Phil Lamar brought Virgil Hawkins to life as Static, and on the anime side, Veronica Taylor voiced Ash Ketchum while Dan Green played Yugi, and Eric Stewart pulled double duty as both Brock and Seto Kaiba. Rob Paulson and Maurice LaMarche were Pinky and the Brain, and names like Tara Strong, Frank Welker, and Tim Daly as Superman round out a roster that reads like a voice acting hall of fame. One detail that set Kids WB apart from competing blocks was the absence of human hosts. Animated characters filled that role instead, with the Warner siblings Yakko, Wakko, and Dot handling duties during the backlot era and Shaggy and Scooby-Doo taking over for the final CW season. Kids WB also took a swing at extending the Cartoon Network's Toonami brand to broadcast in July 2001, rebranding weekday afternoons as Toonami on Kids WB and adding Sailor Moon, Dragon Ball Z, and the Powerpuff Girls. That experiment fell flat because critics and fans felt the Toonami name was being used without any of the edge that made it work on cable, and mixing in non-action fare like R.L. Stein's live-action Nightmare Room and the animated Generation O didn't help. By June 2002, the Toonami branding was quietly dropped. The cracks began to show. The mid-2000s came at Kids WB from every angle at once, and by 2005, the Pokémon ratings that had once defined the block had cooled off considerably, leaving the lineup without a clear anchor. Cable was the biggest threat because Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon, and Disney's channel ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with the budgets and programming volume to match. No Saturday morning block, no matter how strong, could keep up with that kind of constant output, and kids increasingly watched cartoons on their own schedule rather than waiting for a specific Saturday morning slot. FCC regulations compounded the pressure. The Children's Television Act of 1990 and the 1996 Children's Programming Report, which took effect in 1997, required broadcasters to air at least 3 hours per week of educational and informational content, while capping advertising at 10.5 minutes per hour on weekends and 12 minutes on weekdays, with host selling banned entirely. Kids WB had covered its educational requirements through shows like Hysteria and Channel UMP-T3, but as those restrictions squeezed advertising revenue, the math for programming kids' content on broadcast stopped adding up, and then Kids WB hurt itself. September 17, 2005 brought Loonatics Unleashed, possibly the most controversial creative call in the block's history, a show that took the Looney Tunes characters, redesigned them in an anime-influenced futuristic style, and recast them as superheroes. Fan backlash erupted before the premiere even aired, with one of the earliest internet petition campaigns forcing Warner Brothers to soften the character designs before launch. None of that saved the show. Loonatics Unleashed is widely remembered as the symbolic low point of the Warner Brothers animation era, and a later Warner Brothers animation president, Sam Register, would call the character designs a reminder of what not to do. Affiliates wanted out, too. May 31, 2005 brought the announcement that weekday afternoon Kids WB would end at the request of local affiliates who wanted higher-rated adult programming in those time slots. December 30, 2005 was the last weekday afternoon airing, and January 2006 replaced it with daytime WB, shrinking Kids WB to a Saturday-only 5-hour block running from 7 in the morning to noon. The CW transition and the final chapter January 24, 2006 brought news that the WB and UPN would merge into a new network called the CW, a joint venture between Warner Brothers and CBS Corporation. Kids WB aired its last episode on the WB on September 16, 2006, and returned on the CW the following week, September 23, still produced by Warner Brothers Television. But the transition cost the block its biggest assets. Pokémon left in 2006 after the Pokémon Company International took dubbing in-house away from 4Kids Entertainment and moved the show to Cartoon Network, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Departed around the same time. Both franchises that had powered Kids WB's rise were suddenly gone. Without its 2 flagship anime series, the block lost the audience engine that had driven it to number 1. What remained was a lineup leaning on Canadian co-productions with shrinking returns. March 8, 2008 brought the spectacular Spider-Man, the last original series to debut on Kids WB, and while it earned solid reviews, the timing was too late to matter. October 2, 2007 made it official. The CW announced it would discontinue Kids WB and lease the Saturday morning time slot to 4Kids Entertainment for 5 years. Subyuku Janma pointed to children's advertising limits and cable competition as the cause, and stated bluntly that about 10 people were dedicated to the kids' business, that the department would be disbanded, and the company would try to absorb the staffers. Warner Brothers Television Group President Bruce Rosenblum called it a practical decision, saying the company had examined the issue closely with its CBS partners and believed it made the most business sense. And Alfred Kahn, the 4Kids CEO whose company had delivered Pokémon and Yu-Gi-Oh! To Kids WB, was now the one replacing it, expressing delight at securing CW distribution for 5 broadcast seasons. May 17, 2008 was the last Kids WB broadcast. The CW 4Kids launched on May 24th, and that block went through 3 more identities over the next 6 years, becoming Toon's Eye in August 2010, then Saban's Vortex in August 2012, and finally Litton Entertainment's educational block One Magnificent Morning on October 4, 2014. That last transition from actual cartoons to e-educational programming effectively ended traditional broadcast Saturday morning cartoons for good. The entire tradition that Kellner had built his career on, that had defined childhood weekends for decades, simply stopped existing on broadcast television. The Afterlife. Warner Bros. Announced on April 28, 2008 that it would relaunch Kids WB as an online destination, and Kids WB.com opened with 5 subzones covering Kids WB Junior, Scooby-Doo, Looney Tunes, and DC Kids. The site operated for years before being scaled back in 2013, and then on May 17, 2015, exactly 7 years to the day after the final broadcast, KidsWB.com shut down for good. Everything moved to the WB Kids YouTube channel, created on March 31, 2015, which had reached approximately 30 million subscribers by late 2025. The brand still exists in that form, but it functions only as a clip and archival content hub where old episodes and compilations get uploaded. No new shows get programmed, no Saturday morning lineup gets assembled, and no team sits in a room debating which cartoon should anchor the 8 o'clock hour. The library is all that remains. Most of the shows that define Kids WB are still watchable, scattered across streaming. Batman, the animated series, Superman, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, and the Zeta Project all live on Max. Pokémon has bounced between Pokémon TV and Netflix, and other series pop up on Boomerang, Tubi, and Amazon Prime Video. Why it mattered? According to TV Tropes, Kids WB holds the record for the longest-running Saturday morning block in television history, and it remains the only block of its kind to outlive the channel it was created for. It launched on the WB and kept going after the WB didn't. That distinction deserves more attention than it gets. Jamie Kellner built Fox Kids, walked away, and then built something specifically designed to beat it, which is the kind of competitive instinct that doesn't come along often in television. He treated broadcast children's programming as a serious competitive arena, instead of a time slot you filled with reruns and forgot about. When Kellner died on June 21, 2024 at 77, the obituaries focused on his role launching Fox and the WB, but Kids WB was where those competitive instincts played out the clearest and left the most lasting mark. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini used this block as the home for one of the greatest animated universes ever put on screen, giving audiences Batman, the animated series, Superman, Batman Beyond, Static Shock, and the Zeta Project all under the same creative roof. Pokémon found its American audience here during the absolute peak of the franchise, pulling a 40% share among boys when the mania was at its highest. A broadcast block running a few hours a week beat Nickelodeon head-to-head in ratings, something that should not have been possible given that Nick ran around the clock with an entire network built for kids. And when the business model finally buckled under cable competition and advertising regulations, Kids WB went out after a 12-year, 8-month run that nobody in broadcast kids television has come close to touching since. For those of us who were there, Saturday mornings meant waking up early on purpose. They meant the glow of the TV before anyone else in the house stirred. They meant knowing the whole broadcast schedule, at least for a few hours, was built just for you. Kids WB was the last block to make that feeling count on broadcast television, and in the nearly 2 decades since it left the air, nothing has taken its place. Drop a comment telling me your favorite Kids WB show, whether that's Pokémon, Batman Beyond, Yu-Gi-Oh, or maybe Freakazoid if you had taste. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one.